everybody. So good to see all of you here. My name is Leon Wolf, as the disembodied voice just told you. I took over Red State for Eric Erickson this year, and although we are sad to have him gone, we're excited about the things that we have to come in the future, and we're especially delighted that you all came out to join us for the 8th annual Red State Gathering that we're having this year in Denver, Colorado. How about the weather that we're having this year as compared to previous years at the gatherings, right? Isn't it nice to not have it be 105 degrees outside when you walk out at 8 o'clock in the morning? So it's great. We're glad to be here in the city of Denver. Want to encourage all you guys while you're here to spend some time in the gathering hall out there and talk to our sponsors. They're the people who are responsible for us being able to have this year after year at the prices that we're able to offer to you. So stop by, talk to them, view their materials, go to their websites, check them out. They're all great friends of Red State, and we stand behind what they say. Speaking of that, we're delighted to have a lot of great sponsors this year. But we had, I believe, only one sponsor that has been with us since the very first Red State Gathering that we had back in Atlanta, Georgia. I believe they were our one sponsor that we had for the first Red State Gathering in Atlanta, Georgia back in 2009. They've been with us every year since then. I've had a lot of personal friends who have come through and worked for this great organization, and they're back again supporting us this year, and we're delighted to have them be a part of this event. We're delighted to have them doing the work that they do on the behalf of the conservative movement out there in the country. And it is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce our first speaker, who is the CEO of Freedom Works, Adam Brandon. Please welcome Adam to the stage, guys.
Thanks very much. So first, I just want to say the reason that we keep sponsoring Red State, there's a lot of different groups and events that we could sponsor, but we've found as an organization, the people who read Red State tend to be more active. And also personally, I find that when I want to read something interesting on an issue and not just be told what I already know, there's no better place to start than going to Red State. So it's always a privilege to be here. I wanted to start off with, I was thinking before I got up here, what's the best thing I've heard all year? And the last time I spoke was right before at an event at the Republican convention in Cleveland. And I'm from Cleveland. And that morning, I was listening to one of my local sports talk show hosts, and they were talking about how Cleveland State and Case Western Reserve were being interrupted for the Republican convention. But don't worry, students, because if you hear something that was offending you, they were going to keep the universities open for safe spaces. And they were debating this, and I'm getting ready, and then this guy calls in, and he was an elderly Clevelander, and he says, you know, a few years ago, my college was interrupted, and they sent me to a safe space, and it was called the Pacific. And I thought that kind of was a great, in a nutshell, of what we're battling today between people who do their duty, fight for this country, and I've been thinking about that vet a lot, because I'm trying to make sure the country's living up to the standards that he laid out when he went, and a lot of his friends didn't come back. Versus, we can't say anything to offend you on a college campus, and we're going to create a safe space. So I'm deeming this now a conservative safe space for the next, how many days? I've got a few comments I'd like to make, run through them in about 5-7 minutes, and then I'd love to take a couple of questions. So if you've got a question for me, start thinking about it. I actually do want to begin this on bad news. I'm sorry to say the last week our movement had a big setback, and it's just not getting the attention it needs. But one of our best congressmen, Tim Huelskamp, lost his election last week. And the reason I want to point that out is, how many of you have heard of the House Freedom Caucus in this room? Well, that's good. I think last year almost no one has heard about it. But our best allies in the House, that's where they are. And what I'm really scared about is, with all the focus at the top of the ticket, slowly but surely, every one of our best allies has a target on their back, and they're getting picked off. And Huelskamp should be a wake-up call to everyone in this room about the seriousness of this election cycle. Because if Donald Trump wins, the House Freedom Caucus are the people that'll shepherd in his good pieces of legislation and stop his bad pieces of legislation. If Hillary Clinton wins, it's going to be the House Freedom Caucus that's laying down in front of the train tracks to try and stop her agenda. Either way, We desperately need to have this bunch of House conservatives. And if we don't have their back, they are slowly going to get picked off. And when you think about the agenda that Hillary Clinton's going to be bringing, what I'm terrified of is that you'll have a Republican leadership that will be scared, and the lessons they'll take of this election is we've just got to go right up to the White House and make a deal. And if we're going to make those deals, we spend a lot of time talking about the First Amendment and the Second Amendment. I want to warn everyone that I think the other amendment that's under threat right now is the 10th Amendment. And the 10th Amendment's corollary is Article 1. So the 10th Amendment basically says, here's the feds, here's the states. And Article 1 basically says, here's Congress, here's the executive branch. And I am so scared under the next presidency that all this power is going to start to be centralized to a point where it's going to be hard to get back with the regulators, with the bureaucracy, particularly with the presidency. And if we lose the House Freedom Caucus, I'm thinking there's not going to be too many people left to fight for the 10th Amendment and Article 1. So please keep that in mind. The good news is Speaker Boehner has been replaced by a guy named Warren Davidson, who I'm very excited about. So the congressman who's replacing Speaker Boehner is going to be a member of the House Freedom Caucus. So you lost Huelskamp, but you did have a victory. Dave Bratt, one of my favorite congressmen, the guy who took out Eric Cantor, he doesn't have a challenger. So he's surviving a very important election. But between now and early August and the end of the month, there's 3 elections I want you to pay attention to, 2 of which are in Arizona. Congressman Gosar, great guy. Right after Huelskamp got defeated, Chamber of Commerce and other money's flown into Arizona to take him out. If they succeed in taking out 2 of our best guys, we're in big trouble. If you're from Florida or know people in Florida, there's a fantastic woman by the name of Mary Thomas who's running in Florida. And then finally, Andy Biggs in Arizona. Those are going to be 3 bellwether House races that I hope you have on your radar going forward. And this is our beachhead with the House Freedom Caucus and these guys. If we lose them, boy, we're in trouble. So with that, I wanted to also just kind of switch to something I've been thinking about. And as you're talking about the future, I'm just hoping at this conference you don't spend too much time focusing on this presidential race and think about what November is going to start to look like. I kind of made a list of our strengths and our weaknesses. And just think, and our strengths are solid. We've got a House Freedom Caucus. We've got people like Cruz and Lee and Paul in the Senate. And that's more people elected than I remember in a long time. We've got a very passionate activist base. Just look at the folks here in this room. We are so strong at the state level, and you're going to hopefully speakers will be bringing up these victories that the conservative and libertarian movement's been having at the state level. We're probably so focused on federal, we're forgetting about all the great work that's happening back in the states. Truth's on our side, which you can't discount that when you're actually right on policies. And then finally, one of the reasons I love RedState is disruption in the media. We no longer need the New York Times to be reporting to us on what the issues are. Those are our strengths. But as you're listening to the speakers, here's 6 things we need to improve upon, and then I'd love to take some questions. Number 1, guys, we're bad at messaging. We're selling freedom and we can't sell freedom. We really have to think about that. And we have to improve upon that in the next cycle. Number 2, part of being bad on messaging, we're terrible storytellers. When you think about how the Obama economy is grinding down individuals, the left is very good at showing people who have been victims of whatever. We're not very good at showing victims of big government. And I think messaging, and the big part of that is storytelling, is something we need to focus on. Number 3, did you ever realize it always seems like we're anti-everything? Well, the reason that I think we're anti-everything is we're kind of pulling back a little bit. And when the other side is setting the agenda and you're reacting to their agenda, you're always going to be anti. So that leads to my next thing. Does anyone here remember when Obama first ran The Life of Julia? And if you don't realize, The Life of Julia was from when Julia was born till she died. It was a complete vision of what the Obama administration would do for her. What I'm hoping coming out of like Red State, what is our complete vision? Because once we have our complete vision, then it's going to be a lot easier to sell our messaging and explain, and then we're not anti-everything. It's like, hey, look at this vision. And two last things. One thing, this comes from Mike Lee's chief of staff, Boyd Matheson, because when Mike Lee's chief of staff retired, I asked him how's FreedomWorks helping or hurting. And he said one thing as a movement we have to be very careful of is he was washing his hair, and he called me after he washed his hair, and he's like, I'm staring at the shampoo bottle, and I saw the problem. Lather, rinse, repeat. We spend so much time ginning up for these battles. We're going to fight Obamacare, and then we lost that. Okay, now we're going to fight the budget, and we get all excited, and then we lose that. And then we just keep doing this. We need to be showing victories. I guess this is a long way of saying we need to be more strategic as a movement. And I go back to these state battles. We're kicking butt at the state level. Maybe that's where we start sharing our stories. And then finally, this is something that I've had to learn, which is a little bit more of patience. There are no silver bullets to these challenges that we're facing. And we can't expect that one member is going to go and solve all of our problems overnight. And what we need is we need everyone in this room to stay involved in this movement no matter what happens in the fall. Because the only way I can guarantee you we're going to lose is if people just start saying, you know what, the debt's too big and this. Remember I said we have truth on our side? So that's kind of what I'm going to implore everyone here is as you're looking forward, start thinking about what we're going to be doing in the future, this vision, that type of stuff. I think that's how we're going to be, that's the only way we're going to win in the long run. And so with that, I think I only have a couple more minutes, but I'd love to take a question or two, and I believe there's a microphone someplace. Yes, sir.
Can you all hear me?
I'll repeat it, so.
Republicans have had Congress for, 6 of the last 8 years. There's any number of issues that they ran on that they said they would do, repeal Obamacare,
Right.
right down the list. Why is it that none of those no legislation was passed?
Great question. This is getting to why we're so frustrated. We worked so hard to get these different members elected. And if you look at the last 6 years, what have we gotten from our Republican Congress? What have we gotten from the Republican Senate? Remember, we take the Senate back, all these awesome things that will happen. Nothing's really happening. This is why I get back to the importance of the House Freedom Caucus, because that's our bridgehead. If those folks are stronger, they will set the tone for leadership. But right now, leadership looks and they're picking them off one by one. So there's no incentive to listen to these guys. So the other thing, I didn't have time to get into this, but as a movement, we spend a lot of time talking about politics, right? We spend a lot of time talking about principles. We never talk about process. And one thing I've realized is that our opponents, both in the conservative movement, like the old GOP guard, and the progressives, they know process. So even when we win, since they have their hands on the control of the process, like the Joint Committee on Taxation, why do we not get fundamental tax reform? Because the IRS has its own committee in Congress. Why don't we blow that committee up? There's no reason to have that committee. That's a process question, and that's a harder one that we need to start getting better at. Otherwise, I think our movement will continue to be in retreat.
I guess kind of combination question statement, and I agree with you. I think that we do need a vision. Mm-hmm. Bible says where there is no vision, the people perish. Mm-hmm. So I think the messaging side of this, if you listen to a Democrat, you can turn on any media source, any Democrat, and they repeat the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. And when you listen to a Republican, you hear 20 different things. The second thing we have is we have a lot of anger. But we have not been able to channel that anger into action. And the problem with that is we have all this anger, all this frustration, but nowhere to go. And I think that we have a lot of conservatives that have misdirected their anger. Whether you're pro-Trump or anti-Trump, your anger at each other, your anger at the Libertarian Party. And I think what all of us in this room, or most of us in this room, are angry at the Republican establishment. And we're angry at Mitch McConnell. And we're angry at the deal making. And we're angry at the betrayal. We're angry at being crushed. We're angry at seeing Tea Party people get eliminated in Republican primaries, right? So we're angry at all these things. But what do we do? Where do we go? And in my mind, the only vision that we have is to say that we have to begin to formulate at the state parties, at the states, And we got to be able to help the states see the vision that they have the voice, that they have the control, right? That they have the ability to limit a federal government. But at that point, we also have to be able to lay the groundwork, in my mind, for a conservative third party. And that is where I believe my vision is. That is where I believe we need to go. That is what I believe that we need to do. And that gives conservatives an ability to go and to be able to channel their anger that they have, number one, at the right place, to get on message that we need to restore the message to the states and to the people in the grassroots, and for the states to exercise that voice over the federal government, and then to begin the process to put constitutional conservatives in state legislators, state senates, that will be able to exercise that authority over the federal government.
My quick response to that is that my third party are the House conservatives. Those are the people that I want to put our energy into supporting, because you talk about being let down. The people who've never let me down tend to be the Mike Lees, the Dave Bratts. And they all tend to clump together in the same place. And what I just want to make sure that we don't do, because we could all get very frustrated, I just don't want to fracture the movement to the point that the progressives just have a straight shot at the quarterback forever. And I think part of that is you have to have the right blocking and tackling, and yeah, it's almost football season, so I'm a little distracted, but this is why if there's one thing you're hearing me say, please pay attention to what's happening in some of these House races. I think a lot of our long-term battles are going to be won and lost there. So I think I'm getting my hook now, well, I have to give up the stage, so I do appreciate it, and thank you very much.
Thank you guys very much. Sorry we're not going to have time to get to everybody's questions throughout this. We are going to try to keep on schedule as much as possible, respect you guys' schedule as well. People get involved in the conservative movement for a lot of different reasons. For some people, like me, the issue of abortion was very big in getting them involved. For other people, it's economic issues, things like taxes, things like government spending, things like getting the economy back on track. A necessary precursor to all of those things functioning in the way that they should, though, is that our nation has to be secure. In addition to all the other horrible things that happened to our country as a result of 9/11, I think we all remember that our economy took a tumble and a crash as well. When the country is not safe and when the country does not feel safe, there are a lot of negative consequences to all the things that we want to accomplish. Everything runs downhill and flows from that. Keeping our country safe is the first and most important goal of the federal government. It is why the federal government exists. We like to argue, should the government be doing this? Should it be doing that? Keeping us safe is the number one goal of government. And that's why I'm delighted to welcome to the stage one of the most respected voices in foreign policy and national security in the country. He has served in multiple Republican administrations in a number of different capacities. He is involved in a number of different conservative think tanks, including the American Enterprise Institute. He is a regular contributor on Fox News with respect to national security issues, and he's a name and a face who I'm sure will be familiar to most of you. So without further ado, I would like to welcome to the stage Ambassador John Bolton.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here today with you and to start off what looks to be a fantastic weekend. So I wish you good luck throughout. And as you heard, what I want to talk about is conservatism and the future of national security. Now, obviously, we're in the middle of a presidential election, and given the structure of our constitutional system, the president has the primary responsible for conducting foreign policy. So it's very hard to talk about this issue in the abstract, hard to distinguish it from the personalities that are involved. But of course, I won't say anything political today. It will all be pure objective analysis. So with that in mind, look, there is no doubt in my mind that the American people understand deeply, profoundly, that the president's main job is to keep them safe from international threats. I think people in Washington don't quite get that. I think the conventional wisdom that it's always domestic issues that are on people's minds is just wrong. Wrong in a time of nuclear proliferation, wrong in a time of international terrorism. And the people have a deep instinct for what Adam Smith wrote in The Wealth of Nations. He said in that classic work that I know everybody in this room has read, he said, the first duty of the sovereign, first duty, is to protect the society against the violence of other societies. And that's exactly right. That's what the job of the national government is primarily. The rest of it, many, many important issues we see being debated this election year. But the top has got to be national security. And if it isn't, it should be. Because if that's not taken care of, everything else is at risk. And it underlines the critical nature of understanding what America's proper place in the world should be. There is a direct linkage between a strong American presence internationally and a strong American economy and a strong domestic way of life. And the linkage works the other way too. You can't sustain a strong American presence internationally unless the economy has been strong. And we've been weak internationally for the last 8 years, and we've had a pathetically weak economic recovery from the recession of 2008. This is the time to change that on both fronts. Whether we will or not is obviously very much in doubt. You know, several years ago, I heard a foreign diplomat from a small country in Asia trying to explain how to deal with the United States. And he said, you know, the United States is not a normal nation. He didn't mean that as a compliment, but I took it as one, because we are not a normal nation. We are an exceptional nation. And what we need in our leadership is people who understand that. Right now, we've got a president who doesn't understand it, who was asked on his first trip to Europe, do you believe America is an exceptional nation? It's incredible that the reporters even asked him, because they suspected what the answer might be. So Obama said, yes, I believe in American exceptionalism, just as the British believe in British exceptionalism and just as the Greeks believe in Greek exceptionalism. So let's parse that sentence for a second. The first part, he says, so I just said I believe in American exceptionalism, stop criticizing me. But he took it back in the second two-thirds. You know, he didn't have to stop with Britain and Greece. There are 193 members in the United Nations, just as the Burkina Fasosians believe in Burkina Faso exceptionalism, just as the Papua New Guineans believe in Papua New Guinea. I think the point is pretty clear. If everybody's exceptional, nobody's exceptional. And that's what Barack Obama thinks. He doesn't put American national security at the top of his priorities, and neither will Hillary Clinton if she's elected. She's going to pursue the same policies that he has, domestically and internationally. She didn't have to move to the left to satisfy Bernie Sanders supporters. She was already there. And I can claim inside information on that point. She and her husband were a year ahead of me in law school. I like to say I've been burdened with them 20 years longer than the rest of the country. She was a radical in law school, and she's a radical today. And that's why I think the stakes are so high this November, and why we have got to have a national debate about what America's proper place in the world is, because we are threatened across a wide range of issues. And I think her tenure as Secretary of State in the first 4 years of the Obama administration illustrates how this profoundly misguided view of the world and America's role in it affects us here at home so negatively. Let's just start with international terrorism. Within the past several months, high-level intelligence officials appointed by Barack Obama have testified in open session of Congress that the terrorist threat we face in the United States is higher today than it was in the days before 9/11. That's his own intelligence chiefs reporting. Now, he's living on a different planet when he talks about how ISIS is being rolled back and the terrorist threat is diminishing. These people, his own selections, are telling us the truth. And the reason is because the president himself doesn't regard international terrorism as a serious national security threat. It's part of his unwillingness to confront the larger world. I just don't think he cares that much about national security. He wants to fundamentally transform America, and these foreign events are, for him, unnecessary distractions from his real priority. But I think the evidence could not be clearer. From terrorist attacks in this country, in Orlando and San Bernardino, at the Boston Marathon, countless other individual incidents of terrorist activity that are covered up as workplace violence or simply not reported fully. This is a real problem in the United States and in Europe, where they don't want to identify who the terrorist is. Just like Loretta Lynch didn't want to release the transcripts of the tapes that the terrorist killer in Orlando made to the police in his calls with them. And what they wanted to delete was where he was revealing he was a follower of ISIS. You know, if you treat the American people like adults, they can reach their own conclusions. And that's another problem of this administration. They don't want to treat us like adults because they're afraid we'll draw a conclusion very different from theirs. But what has happened because of the administration's unwillingness to acknowledge that terrorism is not a law enforcement matter. It's not something that you can deal with after the fact by prosecuting the terrorist as if they had just knocked off the local Starbucks, is that the threat will grow and continue to spread in the United States and Europe. And one of the principal manifestations of the threat is that the Middle East, really North Africa all the way across to Pakistan, is descending into chaos. We've gone from a circumstance in the last 8 years when there's a problem in country A or a problem in country B to the entire region losing state structures that were created in the aftermath of World War I. That's what ISIS has helped to do in Iraq and Syria. I think those two countries have ceased to exist as functioning states. And ISIS is one of the main reasons, but not the only reason. We've seen ISIS and Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups helping to disintegrate states right across the region, where Mali was almost taken over by a terrorist group. There are terrorist attacks against oil and gas infrastructure in Algeria. Libya has ceased to exist as a functioning state. It's a home for terrorists and thugs of every description. Somalia hasn't had an effective government in 25 years. Boko Haram is ripping up the seam between northern Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, declaring its allegiance to the ISIS caliphate, spreading through Cameroon and other nearby countries. Yemen on the Arabian Peninsula has the incredible distinction of being host to Al-Qaeda on the Arabian Peninsula, a growing ISIS chapter, the Houthi rebels who are backed by Iran. The government has disintegrated. Egypt can't control the Sinai Peninsula. It's used as a highway for traffickers in terrorism, weapons of mass destruction, drugs, and human traffickers. Obviously, ISIS has caused the disintegration of Syria and Iraq. Lebanon has all but ceased to exist as a functioning government. And then we come to the issue of Iran, which I'll return to, but which remains the principal financier of international terrorism around the world. Sunni terrorism as well as Shia terrorism. I like to say the Iranian Ayatollahs are equal opportunity dispensers of funds and weapons to terrorists. We've got Afghanistan once again descending into chaos, and Pakistan with its substantial arsenal of nuclear weapons right next door, increasingly unstable. And if Pakistan were to fall to Pakistani Taliban, you'd have that arsenal, maybe 60 to 200 nuclear weapons, immediately in the hands of terrorists. You wouldn't have to wait for Iran to get nuclear weapons. And all of this, we see the administration, while it's prepared to use military force, using it in a completely ad hoc way. You've seen in the papers that the ISIS stronghold of Sirte in Libya has apparently fallen to U.S.-backed government forces, and it stands to reason we've pounded Sirte into the ground. And what did the ISIS people do? Did they sit there and get bombed until they were all dead? No, they've all left. You know, they've gone somewhere else. This is an exact repetition of the Clinton administration strategy in the late 1990s when the National Security Advisor, Sandy Berger, later arrested for stealing classified documents from the archives. Sound familiar? Sandy Berger used to call their anti-terrorism strategy whack-a-mole. You know, have a terrorist over here, you hit him there. Have a terrorist over there, you hit him there. Guess what? That's not a strategy. And the terrorist can figure it out. And they figured it out here, too. So the terrorist threat is growing around the world. We now see attacks in places as far away from the Middle East as Bangladesh and Indonesia, where Christian groups are targeted. We've seen what ISIS has done in the territory it controls, committing genocide. Even the Obama administration has recognized it against Christians and offshoots of Islam like the Yazidis. So the new president's going to come in facing a circumstance which Barack Obama's own senior intelligence officials tell us is more dangerous than the one George W. Bush inherited in 2001. This is proof positive that under their policies, the country is less safe today than it was 8 years ago. That alone is a reason not to put in office one of the principal architects of the policy, who has not diverged from it in any material respect. Now, in addition to this terrorist threat, which we feel on a daily basis, we know what happens when there's an attack in Orlando, or we read about this tragedy in Nice where a terrorist using a truck killed over 80 people on a promenade by the beach. So it has an immediacy to us, which we can certainly appreciate. But there are bigger terrorist threats out there. And the biggest terrorist threat of all is the prospect that they or their state sponsors will gain deliverable nuclear weapons. And under this administration, although it may seem remote from terrorism, North Korea has detonated 3 of its 4 nuclear devices. Where did they get the plans for their nuclear devices, their capacity to enrich uranium? They bought it from A.Q. Khan, a Pakistani national, who has also sold nuclear weapons plans to Iran and Libya back in the day. We know this. He may have sold nuclear weapons designs to other countries too. And what did we find out? Remember that Pakistan got its nuclear weapons capability from China. When we made a deal in 2003 with Gaddafi to get him to give up his quest for nuclear weapons, he turned over those nuclear weapons plans that A.Q. Khan had sold to him in North Korea. They were in Chinese. So this threat of proliferation is a global threat, and North Korea and Iran are today cooperating on their nuclear programs. We've known since 1999 they've been cooperating on ballistic missiles. There's every reason to believe they're cooperating on nuclear weapons as well. When the Israelis destroyed a reactor in the desert in Syria in September of 2007, it was a nuclear reactor being built by North Koreans, duplicating the design of their reactor at Yongbyon. Now, I think it's almost certain Iran was financing that reactor because the Syrians couldn't do it themselves and the North Koreans don't do anything for free. I think a good part of Iran's nuclear weapons research and enrichment capabilities may be in North Korea, where our intelligence is even weaker than it is inside Iran. And we know that Barack Obama's Vienna nuclear deal with Iran has given that country a free path to deliverable nuclear weapons in the future. This was a deal that Hillary would have cut in her 4 years in office if she could have. She has supported it in every respect every day since the deal was made, and in its implementation. She'll carry it out if she's elected president. And once you have Iran with a nuclear weapons capability and a ballistic missile capability of increasing sophistication, we will be at risk. You know, our own U.S. commander of U.S. forces in Korea and the South Korean military as well has said they believe North Korea has succeeded in miniaturizing their nuclear devices to the point that they're very close to mating them with their ballistic missile program, putting it under a nose cone that can reach the west coast of the United States in the very near future. And Iran is going to have the same capability. They don't need an intercontinental ballistic missile to hit Israel. They don't need one to hit most of Europe. They need it to hit us. And that's what they're aiming to get. But they don't even need ballistic missiles if they've got terrorist allies like Hezbollah or Hamas or others to whom they could give a nuclear device. They can bring it in to this country over the Mexican border, reassemble it in an American city, and detonate it in place. This is the kind of threat that we're facing and that we have now enabled through the Iran nuclear deal. We're finding out things about this deal every day that show that Barack Obama has committed the worst act of appeasement in American history. The revelation of the $400 million in cash, shrink-wrapped and delivered to Tehran, was part of the nuclear deal. It was ransom for hostages too, but it was all part of the nuclear deal because they knew they couldn't do the nuclear deal and explain to the American people that they had left Americans hostage in Tehran. So they had to get them out some way or another. And all of this, I think, was completely of one design. And even if you believe, and it's possible, that the negotiations were conducted separately and by different people, as the State Department has said, it was all part of the same strategy. And we know that from the way that it turned out, although you won't read it in the mainstream media. But on Saturday, January the 16th of this year, occurred the most critical date of the nuclear agreements called Implementation Day, Saturday, January 16th. That afternoon, Tehran announced that the hostages were being released. But they didn't leave Tehran because they were waiting for the plane with the money in it, which arrived Sunday morning. Then the hostages plane took off. What does it take? I mean, you're going to believe the State Department and the White House spokespeople or what you can see with your own eyes? And it's not just the conclusion that Iran drew from this money for hostages or the surrenders of the nuclear deal. It's the conclusion everybody else around the world drew. That this is what you can get from Barack Obama, and this is what you can get from people who agree with his view of the world. How different can you imagine this from January the 20th, 1981, when Ronald Reagan took office and the hostages were released because they were basically told by the outgoing Carter administration, we don't know what this guy Reagan is going to do. You know, you've had to deal with us. This guy is completely different. And the Ayatollah said, you know, maybe we ought to cut our losses on this before it's too late. They surrendered in the face of American strength. In this case, we surrendered for Barack Obama to get this nuclear deal. And every would-be proliferator around the world sees the consequences. If you only have enough patience, you too can sucker the United States into agreeing to your nuclear weapons program. Now, in addition to these immediate threats that we can see of terrorism and proliferation, there are broader strategic threats that we're not doing anything about. We've got the Russians apparently hacking into computer systems, not just of the Defense Department and major American aerospace and defense companies, but the Democratic National Committee. Don't think they didn't try to hack into the Republican National Committee too. Who knows what they've got from Hillary's homebrew server. Look at what they've done in Ukraine. They have changed international boundaries on the continent of Europe by the use of military force, something we said in 1945 we would never permit again. They now threaten NATO member countries like Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania, who are scared to death that we won't stand by them. Vladimir Putin said over 10 years ago, the last time he was president, that the breakup of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. Most of us think it was a pretty good way to end the 20th century. He obviously has a different view, and he's trying to reestablish Russian hegemony over that space to project power around the world. It used to be Russia had one military base outside the territory of the former Soviet Union. That was the Tartus facility, naval facility in Syria. Under Barack Obama, they built a major air base at Latakia in Syria that puts Russian fighters and bombers within a few minutes flying time of the northern border of Israel. They've got sales to Egypt and military advisors there for the first time since the 1970s, when Anwar Sadat expelled the Soviets, brought Egypt into the orbit of the West and negotiated the Camp David agreement with Israel. Russia's on the move despite holding a very weak economic hand. Its economy is a one-trick pony. When the price of oil goes down, as it is now, they're in trouble. And yet its influence is increasing to our detriment around the world, not just in Eastern and Central Europe, but in the Middle East and elsewhere, while ours decline. And you know, a few months ago, Russia and China conducted joint naval maneuvers in the Eastern Mediterranean. And what is our Sixth Fleet? It consists of the flagship in Italy and whatever American ship happens to be passing between the Strait of Gibraltar and the Suez Canal. That's our Sixth Fleet these days. China, no surprise, they're spreading their wings. That naval maneuver was a sign of it. The Chinese are building a blue water naval capability for the first time in 600 years. Yes, you heard me right, 600 years. They're increasing their ballistic missile and nuclear weapons capabilities. They've got one of the most sophisticated cyber warfare programs on the planet. They have anti-access and aerial denial weapons to push American naval units away from the western shores of the Pacific, which we have dominated since 1945. They have anti-satellite weapons to blind our intelligence gathering capabilities in time of hostilities. They are making assertive, almost belligerent territorial claims in the East and South China Sea. You know, in the Middle East, they like to talk about making facts on the ground. The Chinese have dispensed with that. They're making the ground in the South China Sea. And what are they putting on it? Farms and research facilities? No, they're building air bases and naval bases. They're going to make the South China Sea a province of China. They've already got a provincial capital. Does that make any difference for us? It's so far away. 50% of the world's seaborne trade goes through the South China Sea. Anybody here who was in Vietnam knows how important the South China Sea is, because if those international waters become a Chinese lake, the Chinese have their hands around the throats of the economies of Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, key trading partners of the United States. Every barrel of oil that goes from the Middle East to those countries goes through the South China Sea. What's our policy? We don't have a China policy. We've got a president who doesn't pay it any attention whatever. And the risk is we're going to have another president who succeeds him who thinks that the biggest problem with China is their internal human rights abuses, which are considerable, by the way, but has no notion of the strategic threat that China poses to us. And then there's the risk to our national security that the candidate leading the polls all over the country now, has already posed by conducting her email activities while Secretary of State over an unsecure server, violating rules that I learned the first day I arrived at the State Department for my first job in the government in 1981. And now we find not only did she jeopardize national security that way, but she jeopardized it by economic transactions through the Clinton Foundation that leave us exposed to potential risks of bribery and who knows what else from countries all around the world, in a display of disdain for ethical standards that everybody else in the government is required to comply with. In every job I've had in the government, I've disclosed more than anybody cares to know about the limited state of my finances. I've had to go through unbelievable efforts to avoid conflicts of interest. And she did things from the first day she was in office that would get a GS-15 fired and their careers ended. So all of this, you know, you think you're going to hear anything about this from the mainstream media? Of course not. But if you want to know at her core, how much does Hillary Clinton care about national security? Look at the way she behaved with the Clinton Foundation. Look at the way she behaved with the emails. How can you take this seriously? I mean, I really think the biggest threat to American national security sits in the Oval Office today because he doesn't care about it. But threat number two is coming right behind him, unless things change dramatically. And the final point that demonstrates this, that demonstrated it at the time, today, and well into the future, is the utter failure of her leadership and Barack Obama's at Benghazi on September the 11th, 2012. The Clinton line about Benghazi is, well, secretaries of state don't dirty their hands with things like security issues. You've got experts who handle that. I'm here to tell you, I've worked for 6 different secretaries of state, all of whom cared deeply about the safety of the people who worked with them. People that we put out in far-flung places around the world at the end of a very long telephone line. And we expect them to do their duty to protect us. All they ask in response is that we protect them. And she failed repeatedly. Let me just give a few examples. We knew in early 2011 that things in Libya were extremely dangerous. We withdrew all of our people from Tripoli that year. And how did we do it? Through the U.S. Navy? No, because there was no U.S. Navy in the Mediterranean. We had to rent a Greek ferry boat to get our people out of Tripoli. Now, was that not enough lesson right there to beef up security, to think about contingencies where we might have to evacuate our people in what we bureaucratically call a non-permissive environment? And yet we did nothing. And when the riots and the attacks started all over the Middle East that day, it was not just in Benghazi. The American Embassy compound in Sana'a, the capital of Yemen, was penetrated. The American Embassy compound in Cairo was penetrated. The American Embassy in Tunis, in Tunisia, was attacked. The United States government did next to nothing against the prospect that these attacks would continue. They didn't have enough capabilities, but even those they had, they didn't deploy. It's easy looking back in retrospect to say, well, they couldn't have gotten there in time. Who knew what was in time then on September the 11th? Any prudent person would have said this could continue. But it's even worse than that. We know from Leon Panetta and from Hillary Clinton that that entire day, she didn't speak to the Secretary of Defense once, not once, when Americans were under attack. As I say, I've worked for 6 different secretaries of state, very different people. They'd have been on the phone to the Secretary of Defense every 15 minutes saying, what are we doing to protect our people? She spoke to Barack Obama once that day to get approval for the press release about the Mohammed video. And then what did she do? She went home. This is an incredible signal to the State Department. Because if the Secretary of State is at his or her desk on the 7th floor late into the evening, if you've got anything to do with that issue, you better be at your desk too. The Secretary of State goes home, okay. Now she says, well, we had telecommunications equipment. Yes, Hillary, we've all got telephones. We understand how that works. But there's a leadership factor as well. And what she did was the equivalent of a naval commander leaving the bridge of his ship while it was under fire. And that signal was seen by everybody around the world. And then it got worse the day after, because in response to this murder of the president's personal representative, and that's what an American ambassador is overseas, in response to that, the United States government has arrested one person, to bring them back to this country for a full due process criminal trial. So what the Obama-Clinton policy says to terrorists and state sponsors of terrorism all around the world is that under their worldview, you can murder the president's personal representative and do it with impunity. It's a terrible signal to send. So that's why, as I look around the world and see all of this grim news, it is so critical for the American people to understand this and to see that the consequences of not paying attention to American foreign and defense policy are grave and getting graver. We can protect our interest around the world. We can do it in a peaceful way. Ronald Reagan called it peace through strength. We're pursuing exactly the opposite American policy. Obama and Clinton are wrong. It is not American strength that's provocative, it's American weakness that's provocative. And that's what they have on offer. I think the people in this room understand that. I really think in their guts the people of the United States understand it, but we need to bring them that message. We're in a deep hole after 8 years. If we pursue these policies for 4 more or 8 more years, that hole is going to be hard, if not impossible, to get out of. So a lot's at stake this year. I'm counting on you to turn all this around, and I know your energy is very real, but we've got an awful lot of work to do. To do what? To save our country. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I like to say I spread sweetness and light wherever I go. So I'm happy to take a few questions. I'm not sure if maybe I'll just call on people and I'll repeat the question so everybody can hear it. Yes, ma'am?
I heard earlier this week that Donald Trump mentioned your name as potential Secretary of State if he was to be elected. Has he spoken to you about that?
No. But I don't often get a chance to listen to the Hugh Hewitt radio show, although I'm a big fan of his, and I understand he'll be here this weekend. I'm sorry I'm going to miss him. Why don't you ask Hugh what he thought of that, and maybe he can tell you more than I know. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you on any of your critique of Obama and the attribution of similar positions and views to Clinton. However, I think that your analysis is a bit one-sided in that a very similar critique could be addressed to Donald Trump. In 2008, Donald Trump said we should bug out of Iraq, which was the policy then implemented by Obama that led to ISIS. Obama lent no support to Ukraine during the invasion. Trump supported the invasion. He's an apologist for it. Trump is, if anything, significantly more anti-NATO than Clinton. Trump says we should support Assad, who is an Iranian client in Syria, and if I'm supported by Clinton, of course, as well. And if Assad is victorious, you will have an Iranian empire going from Lebanon to Syria, Iraq, Iran, and eventually Afghanistan as well. It's a giant threat, and he supports that. So this is a problem in that while ISIS has 20,000 men, Putin has 10,000 atomic bombs, and is actively subverting Europe, using both left-wing Green parties to wreck Europe's fracking so they're dependent upon Russian gas, as well as ultra-right-wing parties. The French National Front is funded right out of the Kremlin, and they're building it up by sending refugees. So here's my question to you, okay?
I knew we'd get to it. It was only a matter of time.
What is your critique of Trump's foreign policy, and what would you do to try to improve it were he elected and you had some influence in his administration?
Yeah. Well, look, I've said repeatedly I don't agree with Trump on every single issue, and that's for sure, and you probably heard some of it today. But I think the first test that you have to apply to a presidential candidate is what's their view of America's place in the world, and do they understand that a strong American presence internationally is key to preserving our way of life. And I think Trump clearly understands that. I think Hillary shares the same perspective as Barack Obama. She's not going to say it because she's married to probably the best politician in contemporary American life. But if you ask me where her heart is, I have no doubt it's exactly where Barack Obama's is. And I think Trump look, when he was a businessman, he was a businessman. He doesn't do what I do, which is deal continuously with national security issues. So I don't expect anybody comes to the presidency with complete 360-degree expertise on everything. But I think what he's said in recent weeks, really going back to the speech that he gave at the Nixon Center some months back, puts him clearly in the mainstream of Republican foreign policy thinking. Again, that doesn't mean I agree with him on everything, but let's take just Iraq, or maybe I'll try a couple of your examples. I heard him say last night, or maybe it was in this Hugh Hewitt interview, but he said, I was against going into Iraq, but clearly once there, Obama was wrong to withdraw. And that's exactly right. It was the American withdrawal that led to the formation of ISIS and the threat that we see there now. And I think it reveals as well a much more realistic assessment of how you perform as president. What Obama's doing is pursuing an ideology. The ideology said we never should have gone into Iraq, and I'm going to pretend I can make it like we didn't by withdrawing. But that's not the reality. And once you're there, you have to confront the cards that are dealt you when you come in. So Trump was correct to say it was a mistake to withdraw at that point. On NATO, I have to say, I think the critique that our NATO allies are not living up to commitments that they made, specifically to spend 2% of their gross national product at a minimum for their national defense. If everybody did that, NATO would be considerably stronger. NATO has a lot of internal difficulties, there's no doubt about it. But the fact is, they have sheltered under our umbrella, and countries have taken advantage of that protection to move their domestic expenditures away from the military towards social welfare. Now, they can do it because of us, but there's nobody who's going to do it on our behalf. So I think when you hear people say, oh, he's against NATO, he has said expressly his intention is to strengthen NATO, which I believe in as well. The arguments, and I've been part of them in different administrations, to convince our European friends to increase their expenditures have manifestly failed. So a different line of argumentation seems to me to be worth trying. I once said to a BBC interviewer, it's pretty frustrating dealing with the BBC for those of you who haven't listened to them, I once got so frustrated with one that I said, look, if you're faced with an authoritarian, militaristic regime once again on the continent of Europe, do let us know how it turns out. And words can't describe the look on the guy's face. I mean, so I want to strengthen NATO. Trump says he wants to strengthen NATO. We've got to get our European friends to spend more for their own defense, as Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania are, because they're scared to death. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. I'm Chaplain Klingenschmidt. I host a TV program about religious freedom. And we notice in the Democrat national platform that religious freedom is taking a back seat to now the advance of LGBT rights and the leftist agenda socially. How would that translate, if Hillary Clinton were president, to our foreign policy? When America argues for human rights, for example, in China or in Saudi Arabia, how do you see Hillary Clinton standing up for civil rights as opposed to religious freedom?
Yeah. Well, I'm very worried. When she made her first trip to China as Secretary of State, she was interviewed on the airplane going over, and she basically talked about this and that aspect of the bilateral U.S.-Chinese relationship. And then she said, and when it comes to human rights, look, we're going to say what we always say, but it's not a big issue. And that was the sum and substance of her concern for what was going on inside China. I have long been concerned particularly about international religious freedom. I was honored to be one of the first members on the original Commission on International Religious Freedom, which Congress forced down the throat of the Clinton administration in 1999. I joined the beginning of the commission in 2000, where we focused on the civil war and the genocide in Sudan being waged by the government against the Christian southern part of the country. where we now see another tragic military conflict underway while the Obama administration is apparently off doing something else. I think the concern we have both for Christian populations, but also tiny offshoots of Islam in a number of countries. I mentioned the Yazidis and the Christians, and the actual genocide they face from ISIS in the Middle East is a very real concern. And I think it's got to be something that's much more at the center of American foreign policy than it has been in the last 8 years, and I think would be with a Clinton administration either. Let's go over here if I could. Yes, sir.
You provided us a long list of threats to our national security.
I was just getting started, honestly. It's.
I can think of a couple of lists, but where did we even begin to dig out this? What would you be doing if you were president to even begin to confront the threats in the Middle East, threats in China, Russia, and on and on and on?
Well, the question is, what would you do to begin to dig out from under this avalanche of threats that we face? And I think you have to look at it in two respects. One is, what is the political response of the new president to the environment that he or she will inherit? And then second, what do you do to rebuild the positions of strength that we sought to build up over decades and that Obama has been deconstructing in front of us? And the two are related, but they both go toward establishing a clear understanding in the rest of the world that we intend to protect our interest, and we intend to do it with real American strength. Not because we want conflict, but for precisely the opposite reason, so that we deter adversaries from even thinking about trying to challenge us, because the cost to them of doing so would be unacceptable. So I really think we've got a good analogy in what Ronald Reagan inherited when he took office. I think if you look back at his inaugural address, he really put the message down then that there had been a real shift in the direction America was going to take internationally. And it bought him time. It bought him time because he needed to repair the hollowing out of the American military that had taken place after the end of the Vietnam War in the Ford administration and the Carter administration as well. We've got a seriously deteriorated military capability. We have fewer ships at sea today in the Navy than we've had at any time since 1916, 1916. We have an Army whose force structure is roughly equivalent to the Army in 1938, not a good year. We've got airplanes, B-52s, aerial refueling tankers that are older than the pilots flying them. And somebody pointed out to me the other day that some of the B-52s still flying will be flying for us to the point where the last pilots to fly them are not even born yet, because that's how much we have pushed off investment in military technology. So let's be clear, it's going to be difficult, but I think you've got to start off with a changed political message, and then you've got to talk honestly to the American people about what we need to spend to have the defense capabilities, what we need to do for the economy to have the broader capability to fund it, to restore the positions of strength that Obama has squandered. And I'll take one more real quick question. Yes, sir.
What are your thoughts on the best policy prescriptions to safeguard the homeland against infiltration, subversion, domestic terrorism?
Well, I've laid out a lot of them. Look, this is a serious business, and if we continue to pursue a policy that treats terrorism and the threat of terrorism as just a law enforcement matter, we will never catch up. We will always be in jeopardy. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
My name is Aaron Gardner. I'm one of the many contributors to RedState, and it is my honor today to introduce our next speaker. First time I ever ran anything in a campaign,